Let me pray as we get into God's word. Father, we come before you. I pray for peace, your peace to descend over your people. Some of us here are present physically, but our minds, our hearts are elsewhere. At best, we are distracted. So help us focus. Lord, you are enthroned over all. And therefore, you are enthroned over our lives, our needs, our cries, our pain, our joys, our celebrations, our future. And so we ask, and I urge, would you meet us at the point of our need? Whatever that is plaguing us this morning, whatever is distracting us this morning, Father, would your peace descend? For we are your people. This is your church. This is your word. So speak to us loud and clear, for I ask in Jesus' name. Amen. It is said that one of the bleakest periods in English monarchy is the 10-year-long civil wars in the 17th century. The king at that time was Charles I. Charles I was known to be a tyrant. He was known to be a dictator. In fact, Charles believed that king alone has the absolute power to preside over all matters in life. He believed that he had the sole right to make all laws. If anybody would oppose any law, that person would be opposing God Almighty himself. He genuinely believed that the best form of governance is dictatorship. He believed that since God has appointed him as the king, God only has the right and the authority to overrule him or overrun him. Times were changing. You see, Reformation, 16th century, was about 100 years ago. Times were changing, but Charles I was not willing to adapt with the changing times. There was a man named Oliver Cromwell. Oliver Cromwell came from a modest background, but he quickly grew in military ranks, and he was a parliamentarian as well. He had an encounter with Christ that made him join the English Puritans of that era, who were very rigid in their beliefs. But Oliver was known to be religiously tolerant. While he was religiously tolerant, he was not able to tolerate the tyranny and the dictatorship that Charles presented. He could not just sit and watch England to be ruled with iron fists. He joined the parliamentarians in his zeal to see constitutional monarchy come in. Not absolute monarchy, constitutional monarchy, which was a step away from democracy. In his zeal and zest to see justice prevail against the abuse of power, he went on a war with the monarchy. That resulted in the 10-year-long civil wars, several civil wars. It is said that was the bloodiest period in English history. Over 200,000 lives were lost, all in the name of justice. In the end, Charles I surrendered, he was executed, and Cromwell became the Lord Protector of England. You see, we can ignore small matters of injustice. Somebody cuts you on the road, causes a traffic jam, jumps the light. You can ignore. You're standing in a queue at a store, somebody jumps ahead and cuts the line. You can ignore. Somebody takes a credit that is due to you and gets the promotion. Yeah, you can ignore. But what if when injustice becomes so overwhelming that it leads to anxiety, it leads to debilitating fear, and it leads to oppression? What do you do in face of such injustice? How do you respond to such injustice? The fear, the anxiety, the frustration, and the anger runs deep. It just runs deep and cuts deep within. And in that moment of anger and frustration, what do you do? How do you respond? Some of you know what I'm talking about. Some of you have faced it. A job loss due to someone's selfish motive, or a great financial loss due to someone's selfish motive, and the justice was not done. You had a relational betrayal, a relational disappointment when all you showed was love and trust, and justice was not done. You were wrongly accused or framed by someone in a social setting, and the justice was not done. Somebody did an incorrect diagnosis and prescription leading to chronic illness or a death of a loved one, and the justice was not done. There's anger, frustration that just runs deep. Bitterness. How do you respond? Do you, like Oliver Cromwell, take matters in your own hand and become a revolutionary? Or become an anarchist, an antinomian? How do you respond? That's the question I want to ask and answer this morning. How can we deal with such injustice? What should be our response as the people of God? I want to look for an answer in Psalm 58. Psalm 58. We are in a series in the book of Psalms called The Journey. Psalms is a book of journey, a journey that every person takes in his or her life. A journey of discovery, a journey of revelation, a journey of knowing who God is, and a journey of knowing who you are in the light of who God is. And we've been on that journey. And that journey brings us to Psalm 58 this morning. I want to look at three things in this psalm. I want you to look at accusation, appeal, and anticipation. Accusation, appeal, and anticipation. Think of this psalm as a courtroom drama, where King David, the superscription says that it's written by King David. He's the author of this song. So King David is a prosecutor. He's standing. Then there are these accused, people who are accused of extreme injustice and violence. And David, as a lawyer, he's bringing his case before the judge, God. And this is how he begins, verse 1. He says, "Do you rulers really pronounce just decisions? Do you judge people fairly?" These are rhetorical questions. David is not really looking for an answer. David is asking them, do you really believe that? Some translations translate as mighty ones or judges or gods. The idea there in verse 1 is the people who have power, people who are rulers, people who are leaders, people who have influence and affluence. And David is questioning them, do you really think that you dole out justice? Do you really think that you treat people with equity and fairness? And the response is no. And the reason perhaps he's asking these rhetorical questions because these people think that that is the way of life. These people, perhaps like Charles I, think that the real way of living and governance and leadership is dictatorship. Whatever I say goes. They don't think there is anything wrong with their decisions and their choices. In fact, in verse 3, if you scroll down, David says, from birth, you guys have been twisted. I'm paraphrasing it. That's what David says. Right from your conception, not even your birth, right from your conception, you are violent, you are unjust, you are twisted. It's a hyperbolic statement. Basically, David is trying to say that from your formative years, of your life, all you have done is doled out injustice. All you think, all you see, all you conceive is violence and injustice. You made a life choice to be an oppressor. This is the only way you know how to live and lead. In verse 4, the psalmist David describes them as dangerous. Their venom is like that of a snake, of a cobra. Their attack is life-altering, it's paralyzing. David is saying, these are not just your run-of-the-mill offenders. These are not your casual offenders. These are career choice offenders, chronic offenders. In other words, they're bad to the bone. I like watching movies, and that's nothing new for you. I say that every now and then. But here's one thing I do. I watch one Bollywood movie in 6 months. One in 6 months. Here's the thing. I'm not saying Bollywood movies are bad. I like comedy movies, okay? Being a pastor, there is enough drama in my life. Don't want that on the screen. So I like comedy movies, no-brainers, light movies, and that's what I do Bollywood once in 6 months. And so recently I wanted that. Okay, so Netflix, Amazon, they throw these recommendations. And one of the recommendations threw up was an Akshay Kumar movie. Okay, it's called Bachchan Pandey. Don't watch that movie. Anyways, besides the point, spoiler alert. Now, this movie is about this antagonist, this villain, Akshay Kumar. Okay, he's a thug. He's a murderer. He has murdered numerous people, and he does that for fun. Okay, yes, he is the product of his circumstances. Yes, he's the Messiah for the poor. He does charity on the side. All of that, but that does not change the fact that he has murdered numerous people. To cut the story short, he is presented in a very positive light, being who he is. Towards the end of the movie, he is not held accountable for what he has done, but he becomes a famous movie star. How? From a murderer to a movie star. No accountability. And it's not just Bollywood's fascination of portraying these dark characters in positive light. Even in Hollywood, that happens. Some of you won't agree with me, but take Loki in Marvel. Take Golem in Tolkien narratives. Take Joker in DC. The way they present these dark characters is they present them as there's goodness in them. There is this positive in them. Not looking at their choices in evil and violence and injustice. And the reason why we are trying to portray these characters, these dark characters, in positive light is because we do not want to believe that humanity is capable and culpable of such evil. We do not want to believe we are that bad, that humanity has plunged into complete depravity. Because the moment we come and concede to that, we realize that we are part of humanity and we are capable and culpable of such evil, violence, and injustice. See, there are two kinds of people in the world. People who do overtly evil, violence, injustice, in your face, right? Not ashamed, unabashed, evil. Then there are these other kind of people. These are incognito, evil, wicked people. All are evil. Evil is pervasive. So everybody is sinful. But some are overtly and some are covertly. And these people who are covertly evil are called good people, righteous people. They have this persona of being good. They do good works. They do a lot of charity. On the face of it, they are just God's avatar. But they're fraught with insecurities. They have a disease called self-righteousness. They have this pseudo sense of supremacy and superiority. See, you can expect the extremity of evil from these overtly evil people. You can expect that. But it hits you the hardest and it hits you the deepest and impacts you the deepest when the same thing comes from these so-called righteous people. Some of us are right here. Because you're not expecting it. And the psalmist is helpless. He's like, what do I do? He likens these people to a cobra that is so wild that it cannot be tamed even by the most skilled charmer. It's like the cobra has shut its ears. It does not want to listen to even the most trained, the most skilled, the most talented charmer. There's no solution. The psalmist, in his anguish, in his frustration, he says, what do I do? So we looked at David's accusation. Now let's look at his appeal to the judge. Verse 6. O God, break the teeth in their mouths. Smash the jawbones of the lions, O Lord. Let them disappear like water that flows away. Verse 8, let them be like a snail that melts away as it moves along. Let them be like stillborn babies that they never see the sun. David's appeal is very un-David-like. You don't hear, the persona that if you read the Old Testament, if you see King David, he's this gentle shepherd. Right? And here you see him pronouncing curses upon people, making this appeal to God and saying, God, break their teeth. What do you make of that? How do you harmonize it with Jesus' teaching on nonviolence? What do we do with such prayers? I bet when you read Psalm 58, you quickly jump to Psalm 23 to repent. Sharon is not here, but he came to me, the guy who led singing. He came to me earlier this week and he said, Joy, I've been just reading the Psalm, and there are no songs that talk about breaking teeth and all. What do I do? And that's the fact. What do we do with this appeal? What do we do with this prayer? See, you got to see that at the end of this day, this psalm is a prayer. You don't see David taking up arms. You don't see David marching on the streets, protesting, sitting for hunger strikes. Whether that's legitimate or not, that's a different sermon. But David is coming before his father. David is coming before his king with just deep frustration and anger and anguish. He wants God to do something about the wickedness and the evil and the injustice that he sees around him. See, one thing you observe in what David prays in this stanza, David is asking God to establish his will, to establish his kingdom on this earth. There is this deep yearning, deep longing in David's heart to see God's kingdom established, his will to be done, his justice to prevail against wicked and against evil. Does that sound familiar? Establish your kingdom of God. See, while David yearns to see God's kingdom come, he knows who he is. And he knows who God is. See, perhaps the reason why David is surrendering his right to take vengeance into God's hand is because he knows that he has been on the other side. Because he knows perhaps that he is the one who has disappointed people, who has betrayed people, who has been unjust to people. Now, we do not know when David wrote this psalm. It could be before or after Bathsheba's incident where he raped a woman and killed her husband. But whatever it is, David is well aware of his brokenness. David is well aware of the ugliness in his own life, injustice done through his life. And how can he, the person who has been the cause of injustice, take matters in his own hand and punish people who are doing the same thing? David perhaps was the one who had the means and the resources to punish people. He was a king, remember? But he does not do that because he's well aware of his own brokenness. And so comes before his father, comes before his king and presents this appeal before him that you do something about it. See, we talk a lot about trust in our house. The three of us, my wife Janice and our daughter, 9-year-old Bella, and we talk a lot about justice, right? Our MO is or default mode is trust until broken. We trust one another. Everything that the person says, we trust until it's broken. From a very young age, we've taught her to trust her parents. And in order to cultivate, in order to build that trust, we have had to come through our commitments and follow through our words that we have given to her. And she knows that when mom and dad, they say something, they're following through or they're going to follow through, they will follow through their commitment. Yes, there is delay because of some circumstances, often unforeseen, but they will come through. When she gets into trouble, when she's bullied or somebody has pushed her and somebody has tried to overpower her, she can come back to us and she knows that we will stand up for her. She knows that her dad and mom got her back. And so she doesn't cross the boundary and knock people off the ground. She comes back to us. She can stand up all she wants, but there is a boundary to it. Beyond that, she comes back to us and says, Dad, Mom, can you do something? In David's plea, in his appeal, there is trust. There is this deep trust in God that he brings his frustration and anger and lays bare at God's feet. There is this raw emotion, naked emotion, with which David comes before God and lays at his feet and says, I trust you. Can you do something about them? He says, can you bring this to an end? Does that mean I can't do anything? Pastor, are you saying that you just stay back and do nothing and just keep praying? No, I'm not saying that. I'm saying do what is right. If that means for you to report someone, report someone. If that means for you to communicate the truth in love, communicate the truth in love. But you know what? David is not talking about that. David is done with all of that. He's beyond that. He's saying these people won't listen. They are chronic offenders. They are career violent people. They are beyond it. What can I do? See, the best thing David can do is kill them. Right? Bash them up, kill them, imprison them. The best you and I can do in the face of such injustice and evil is bash them up, isolate them, ostracize them, report them. What can you do beyond that? But here's the fact that you can't squash arrogance with arrogance. You know, it's like two groups, two gangs fighting. One guy shot other, then he shot another, then there is no end to it. You can't temper pride with more pride. You can't weed out self-righteousness with super self-righteousness. If you finish one bully, another person will take place. If you deal with one tyrant, the other one will take place. If you deal with one self-righteous person, there's a whole queue of them. Oliver Cromwell, he got what he wanted. He got his vengeance. He got his reform. Charles was executed. He was made the Lord Protector. But guess what? It only lasted 6 years. Oliver Cromwell died. Charles II came back on throne from exile. Back to the square one. See, the best revenge at times and best vengeance at times is to enable people to see their brokenness. There is no worse feeling in this world than to see yourself completely inadequate, incapacitated to save yourself, to come face to face with your ugliness and your brokenness. Some of the movies and the TV show that deal with afterlife, they present hell in a way that it's a room where people go and they're again and again and again dealing with incidents in their lives where they have done wrong to people. And that's hell for them. Living those incidences of wrong done to people over and over again. While that portrayal is not biblical, but there is a truth in that, and that's the worst feeling. To see as a third person yourself doing wrong to the other. The feeling of ugliness and the feeling of brokenness. See, condemnation cannot bring renewal. Only grace can. We saw David's accusation and his appeal. Now let's look at his anticipation. Verse 10. The godly will rejoice when they see vengeance carried out. They will bathe their feet in the blood of the wicked. It's getting gory, isn't it? Then observers will say, yes, indeed, the godly are rewarded. Yes, indeed, there is a God who judges in the earth. The picture is that of the aftermath of a battle. The enemy is slain. There's blood all over of the enemy, and the victorious army is walking through that bloody battlefield, and their feet are stained with the enemy's blood. David is picturing that God has won the victory, and the righteous folks are rejoicing and celebrating that victory. But if you read carefully in verse 11, there is a now and not yet. While David is asking God and urging God to bring justice, David's motive is for God's justice to be established forever. God is not just looking for a quick fix or a quick solution to the problem of evil and injustice. God is looking for an eternal solution. David is looking for an eternal solution. He's saying, not just now, not just my problem, not just the problem of Israel, but God, deal with the problem of this earth. And only when you are enthroned and acknowledged as the judge over all this world, only then can this problem be solved. David is trusting in God's vindication and his vengeance. His solution is not just short term. He's looking for God's kingdom to be established forever. And he's saying, God, do it. That's the only solution to the problem of evil, injustice, and wickedness. Your kingdom, your grace. See, some of you might ask, but can I pray like that? Can I pray like verses 6 and 9? 6 to 9. See, if you flip to New Testament, you see Jesus speaking some harsh words, calling the religious leaders brood of vipers, whitewashed tomb, and then in Matthew 11, he pronounces woes on the cities, and pretty harsh words. I'm not asking you to go and, just tell people you're a brood of vipers and whitewashed tombs and just pronounce curses on them. What I'm asking you to do is come before your Father and your King and unburden yourself. There are times when injustice is just so much in your face that you feel like murdering someone. You've been through that emotion? I have been through it. You want to just catch hold of someone and strangle someone. And at that time, come before God with raw, naked emotion and unburden yourself. Because if you take matters in your own hand and if you go for justice, it is going to be temporary. See, while Jesus said all this, when the time came, when he faced some of the most grievous injustice done to him, while he hung on the cross, framed and accused of who he really was. Jesus was not accused of doing miracles, framed because of doing miracles. He was not crucified because he was a miracle worker. Jesus was accused of calling himself God. The moment he said, you say I am, that's it. That sealed the deal for him. And when he hung there, he said, he sought forgiveness. Jesus was the one, like David, he had the resources and the means to come down. He didn't have to go on the cross. Imagine if Jesus would have dealt with sin and sinners and wickedness and violence with, Thanos snapping his finger. He could have done that. But the world that he would have forged out of that display of power and influence would have been the world that yearns and desires for power and influence. And they would have then believed that the way to salvation is power and influence and pride, not grace and humility. If Jesus would not have gone on the cross, then grace would have been nothing, humility would have been nothing. That would not be the kingdom that the Father desired. He surrendered himself to the Father's will. You deal with it. I'm going. Perhaps Jesus' vindication was that centurion in Mark saying, Son of God. Perhaps Jesus' vindication was Thomas saying, my Lord, my God. Perhaps Jesus' vindication was the persecutor of the church becoming the biggest promoter, Paul. Perhaps his biggest vindication is the church. You and me. See, our vengeance and vindication is temporary. It would give you temporary relief. But God's vindication lasts forever. I began with a question, how should we respond to such injustice? And after journeying through Psalm 58, we can see that the response is to surrender. It's not easy. Oh, it's not easy. But if you want true justice, trust in God's vindication. Trust in God's judgment. Appeal to Him all you want. Be real with Him, but surrender. Surrender. Let's pray. Father, we desire your justice. We desire your kingdom come, your will be done. But in desiring that, we forget one thing, that we are broken, that we have been recipient of your grace. And only because of that can we come into your presence and cry out. Make us grace dispensers, so that the grace that we have received, the comfort that we have received, that we may be able to comfort others with the same grace and with the same comfort, with the same hope. Father, give us strength to dispense that grace. Wash us fresh every day with your love and with your grace, so that we can dispense the same for others, even the most vilest offenders. Help us surrender. Now may the love of God the Father and the grace of our Lord Jesus Christ and the constant communion and the wisdom of the Holy Spirit rest and abide with each one of us through this week and even forevermore. And God's people said, Amen. God bless. Have a great week ahead. We'll see you next Sunday.